Our second gospel reading is from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Judah territory, this was during Herod's kingship, a band of scholars arrived in Jerusalem from the east. They asked around, "Where can we find and pay homage to the newborn king of the Jews? We observed a star in the eastern sky that signaled his birth, and we're on pilgrimage to worship him." When word of their inquiry got to Herod, he was terrified. And not Herod alone, but most of Jerusalem as well. Herod lost no time. He gathered all the high priests and religious scholars in the city together and asked, "Where is this Messiah to have been born?" They told him, "Bethlehem, the territory of Judah. The prophet Micah wrote it plainly. It's you, Bethlehem, in Judah's land, no longer bringing up the rear. From you will come the leader who will shepherd my people, my Israel." King Herod then arranged a secret meeting with the scholars from the east. Pretending to be as devout as they were, he got them to tell him exactly when the birth announcement star had appeared. Then he told them the prophecy about Bethlehem and said, "Go and find this child. Leave no stone unturned. As soon as you find him, send word, and I'll join you at once." In the scripture from Luke 2 that you heard just a few minutes ago, you heard the familiar lines. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to be registered. Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to the city of David called Bethlehem because he was descended from the house of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged, and who was expecting a child. Now, what do you do when you realize that you've sanitized Christmas so much that you don't really know what it means anymore? Does it hit you when you hear these words that Syria is part of this story? Does that jolt you just a little bit? And what are you thinking now that you hear it? Do the people of Aleppo seem so distant from us here in our warm, cozy church even now that we can't see that our own Mary and Joseph are being directed by a leader in Syria to go to a new place and register? Have you ever thought about what a political story this is? God enters the world, as I told the children, in the form of a child. A child who has a ransom on his head from an insecure leader named Herod, who could not stand to share the spotlight. And wise men, called scholars in the reading I did, show up later, messengers of Herod, who he sent out as spies to find this Christ child. Now, luckily, if you read further down in the story, we learn that the three wise men chose diplomacy over vengeance and went home by another way, refusing to be spies for Herod after all. And these young parents, our Mary and Joseph, they're alone and homeless at the worst possible time, forced to deliver a firstborn child after having been turned away from safe accommodations. This is the Christmas story that jolts us. This version doesn't sound dreamy and starry like pageants with children with tinfoil wings and tinsel halos. That same sort of jolt actually is what happened to the narrator of this book, The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, written by Barbara Robinson. She, the narrator, realizes that the Christmas pageant that her church puts on every year has left out the dark side of Christmas. And even though they may have had a moment in her church service where they read John 1, which says a light shines in the darkness and the darkness does not overcome it, they have moved too quickly, the narrator discovers, from Silent Night to Joy to the World. And well, as the story points out, the pause is important. And believe it or not, it is the herdmans who honor the pause. The herdmans are the worst family ever. They're the most terrible children ever to walk the earth. And when they walk into the church for the first time and monopolize the Christmas play in all its parts, and when they hear this story in Luke and Matthew for the first time, it hits them differently. The Herdmans come from nothing, and they live lives that are on the edge, and they don't know sometimes where their next meal is coming from. So when they hear of King Herod's plan to rid the world of the baby Jesus, they don't gloss over it like some of the other children in the play might. They don't throw Herod out of the story the way we tend to. They laser focus in on it and try to get to the bottom of it. They go do research on who this Herod guy is. And they find out all the bad stuff he did. And they find out how he tried to keep the Messiah from coming into power and interfering with his power. It's easy for us who are comfortable to forget Jesus was born a refugee in a world of danger. It's easy for us to forget there are still Herods in the world continuing to extinguish the light of joy and goodness. It was true at the time of Jesus' birth, and it's true now. The forgotten side of this Jesus story, this birth story, is power. The power of love and might versus the stranglehold power of political enterprise. You see, Herod really shouldn't be left out of this story because the Herods of the world continue to stay with us even now. In the story, those awful herdmans shine a light on the darkness and help the congregation to really see Christmas this year. Everything settled down, and at 7:30 the pageant began. While we sang "Away in a Manger," the ushers lit candles all around the church, and the spotlight came onto the altar. We were supposed to sing "O Little Town of Bethlehem" while Mary and Joseph came in from a side door. Only they didn't come in right away, so we hummed and hummed and hummed, which is boring and also very hard, because before long it doesn't sound like any song you've ever heard at all, more like an old refrigerator. I guess we would have gone on humming till we all turned blue, but we didn't have to. Ralph and Imogene Herdman were there all right. Only for once they didn't come through the door pushing each other out of the way. They just stood there as Mary and Joseph for a minute, as if they weren't sure they were in the right place, because of all the candles, I guess, and the church being full of people. They looked like the people you see on the 6 o'clock news, refugees, sent to wait in some strange, ugly place with all their boxes and sacks around them. It suddenly occurred to me that this was just the way it must have been for the real Holy Family, stuck away in a barn by people who didn't much care what happened to them. They couldn't have been very neat and tiny either, but more like this, Mary and Joseph. Well, right away we had to sing "While the Shepherds Watch Their Flocks by Night," and we had to sing very loud because there were more shepherds than anything else in the pageant, and they made so much noise banging their crooks around like a lot of hockey sticks. Next came Gladys Herdman from behind the angel choir, pushing people out of the way and stepping on everyone's feet. Since Gladys was the only one in the pageant who had anything to say, she decided to make the most of it. "Hey, unto you a child is born," she hollered as if it was for sure the best news in the world. And all the shepherds trembled, sore afraid of Gladys mainly, but it looked good anyway. While the boys sang "We Three Kings of Orient Are," everybody in the audience shifted around to see what the wise men would do as they marched up the aisle. The wise men were herdmans too. "What have they got?" Alice whispered. I didn't know, but whatever it was heavy. Leroy Herdman almost dropped it. He didn't have his frankincense jar either, and Claude and Ollie Herdman didn't have anything, although they were supposed to bring in the gold and the myrrh. It was a hand. And right away I knew where it came from. My father was on the church charitable works committee. They give away food baskets to the needy at Christmas. And this was the Herdman's food basket hand. It still had the ribbon around it saying "Merry Christmas." Leroy dropped the ham in front of the manger. It looked funny to see a ham there instead of fancy bath salt jars we always used for the myrrh and the frankincense. And then they went and sat down in the only space that was left. While we sang What Child Is This?, the wise men were supposed to confer among themselves and then leave by a different door so everyone would understand that they were going home by another way. But the herdmans forgot or didn't want to or something because they didn't confer and they didn't leave. They just sat there, and there wasn't anything anyone could do about it. "They're ruining the whole thing," Alice whispered, but they weren't ruining it at all. As a matter of fact, it made perfect sense for the wise men to sit down and rest, and so I said so. They're supposed to have come from a long way. You wouldn't expect them to just show up, hand over the ham, and leave, would you? As for ruining the whole thing, it seemed to me that the herdmans had actually improved the pageant quite a lot, just by doing what came naturally. Like Imogene deciding to birth a baby, for instance, or thinking that a ham would make a much better present for a family than perfumed oil. I almost wished for the pageant to go on and on, with the herdmans in charge, just to see what else they would do that was different. Maybe the wise men would tell Mary about the problem with Herod, and she would tell them to go back and lie their heads off. Or Joseph might go with them and get rid of Herod himself once and for all. Or Joseph and Mary might just ask the wise men to take the Christ child with them, figuring that no one would think to look there. I was so busy planning new ways to save the baby Jesus that I missed the beginning of Silent Night. When we got to Son of God, Love's Pure Light, I happened to look at Imogene and I almost dropped my hymn book. Imogene Herdman was crying. In the candlelight, her face was all shiny with tears, and she didn't even bother to wipe them away. She just sat there, awful old Imogene Herdman, in her crookedy veil, crying and crying and crying. When Imogene had asked me what the pageant was about, I had told her it was about Jesus. But that was just part of it. It was about a new baby and his mother and father who were in a lot of trouble. No money, no place to go, no doctor, nobody they knew. And then arriving from the east, like my uncle from New Jersey, some really rich friends. But Imogene, I guess, she didn't see it that way. Christmas just came over her all at once, like a case of chills and fever. After the pageant, my father said to my mother, "What's that you got there?" "It's the ham," she said. The herdmans would not take it back. They wouldn't take any candy either, or any of the little Bibles. But Imogene did ask me for a set of Bible story pictures. And she took out the Mary picture and she said, "This is exactly right," whatever that means. Well, I think it meant that no matter how she herself was, Imogene really liked the idea of the Mary in the picture, all pink and white and pure looking, as if she never washed the dishes or cooked supper or did anything at all on earth except have baby Jesus on Christmas. But as far as I'm concerned, Mary is always going to look a lot like Imogene Herdman, sort of nervous and bewildered, but ready to clobber anyone who laid a hand on her baby. And the wise men are always going to be Leroy and his brothers, bearing a hand. When we came out of the church that night, it was cold and clear, with crunchy snow underfoot and bright, bright stars overhead. And I thought about that angel of the Lord, Gladys, with her skinny little legs and her very dirty sneakers sticking out from under her robe, yelling at all of us as loud as she could everywhere, "Hey, unto you a child is born." Joe Kay, a UCC minister, in an article called "Resistance in the Manger," says, "The manger reminds us of a baby born in the humblest of settings to poor parents from an impoverished community. Jesus is not born in a castle surrounded by royalty and privilege. And he's important not because of what he has or where he lives, but because of how he brings love and healing and reconciliation into the world. Same with us. May we learn to love and live. May we learn to heal and truly live into this story as the Herdmans do, as Mary and Joseph did, and as those who came and saw a little child born in a cold barn do when they are forever changed by that light shining in the darkness. Amen.